A heavy sigh shook the dense gray fur, and the cat slowly opened his amber-greenish eyes. He was lying in his rightful spot, a soft fleece throw draped directly next to the hot, faintly creaking from the morning warmth, cast-iron radiator. The golden light, penetrating through the sheer curtain, softly outlined the dust motes swirling in the air. The cat stretched his front paws, feeling every vertebra in his back elongate. This was the perfect familiar morning activity, a routine that never changed. On his ash-gray forehead, where the stripes converged into a dark M, a film of moisture appeared from the heat. But the air inside the apartment had changed. It was thick, warm, as always, but now permeated by a sharp, persistent odor of something chemical and bitter, medicine. The cat dropped to the floor. Usually he would immediately head to the kitchen to demand breakfast, but today he stopped in the middle of the hallway. The anxiety wasn't in the smell, but in the sound. Muffled, desperate sobs and short, dry coughing fits drifted from the master bedroom. It was the baby crying. At 12 months old, he usually laughed loudly and shrilly, or crawled after the cat, grabbing his tail with soft but insistent little hands. The cat always allowed it, only purring softly, feeling like a part of this big, warm, safe world. But for several days, the baby hadn't laughed. He only coughed, and his small face was crimson with strain. The cat raised his head, sniffing. The scent of fish, which usually signaled his favorite kibble in the bowl, was absent. The only thing he smelled was that nagging alcoholic medicine. He walked toward the nursery door to check, but his owner immediately pushed him away, gently but firmly. "No," she said, sounding tired, and her voice came out unusually clipped. Clara didn't stop to pet him, nor did she meet his gaze. She had been avoiding him for 3 days now, steering clear of even accidental contact. Her body was rigid, like a stiff board, her shoulders hunched. Clara's indifference pierced through their usual morning rituals. The cat went to the kitchen, his stomach beginning to ache painfully. His owner, Ethan, was standing there by the teapot. "Look at him. He's creeping around again," Ethan snapped harshly, without even turning around. "Well, what do you expect him to do?" "He's asking for food?" Clara quietly countered. She stood by the window, clutching a crumpled tissue. "He's not asking. He's sick." Ethan raised his voice. "Didn't you hear what the doctor said? The cough won't get better as long as this furball is here." The cat stood on his hind legs and scratched the cupboard door where his dry food was kept with his claws. Ethan took a step, and the cat flinched back. "Get your paws off that," Ethan said, his tone not angry, but utterly cold. "You don't get any today." The cat sank to the floor. His whiskers twitched with confusion. Breakfast was always at 7 o'clock a.m., and now it was nearly 10 o'clock. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet he was being punished. He retreated to the couch and curled up, but even in sleep he found no peace. He could feel the vibration of his owner's voices through the pads of his paws. In the evening, the conversations grew louder and more ragged. "It's a fur allergy, Clara. His throat is swelling, do you understand? We can't risk it." "But where will he go?" "To the shelter. I called. They have waiting lists for months, and it's so degrading." Wet, broken notes appeared in Clara's voice. "No, not the shelter," Ethan firmly interrupted. "The shelter is worse. We'll just take him out past the county line, closer to the rural area where there are private homes. Someone will take him in. They always need barn cats there. He'll find his own way." Something constricted inside the cat. These sounds were like 2 stones grinding against each other. Although he didn't understand the words, he understood the intent. They were bad. When the clock struck 7:30 and the early winter twilight thickened outside the window, Ethan resolutely walked over to the couch. For the first time in a long time, he picked up the cat. It was a strange, alien touch. It wasn't affectionate. It wasn't familiar. It was a strong, grasping motion. The cat's breathing hitched. He felt every muscle tense beneath his short gray fur. "I'm sorry, old man," Ethan muttered heavily. It was the only word he spoke to the cat, but it held such a weight that the cat shuddered. The next thing the cat felt was the tight, dark space of the carrier. Hard plastic pressed against his sides. The cat huddled into a corner, his breathing becoming quick and shallow. He clawed at the bottom, trying to escape. Outside, Clara began to cry. A real, loud, cutting wail, which she immediately tried to stifle. The carrier was lifted sharply and carried away. The cat found himself in the car. He hated these rides. Usually he went to the vet, but Clara was always sitting beside him then, quietly slipping her fingers through the grate. Now there was only the cold seat and the back of his owner, who was silent, staring straight ahead. The cat began to meow, first quietly, questioningly, then louder, urgently. His owner didn't react. The road stretched endlessly. They drove longer than to any clinic, longer than anywhere the cat had ever been. He felt the sound of the tires change, asphalt giving way to gravel, and the surroundings becoming silent. Too silent. Only the distant, prolonged drone of the wind penetrated the metal. The car stopped. In the darkness, the cat heard the click of the lock. The carrier door swung open. His owner did not take him out gently. He simply tilted the plastic container, and the cat tumbled out. The cat landed on uneven, icy ground, where sparse, sharp pebbles were embedded. He instantly turned around. The red rectangle of the taillights was already pulling away, illuminating a narrow stretch of the road and the high, dark wall of the forest, which smelled of damp earth and snow. The cat froze. His body was locked with tension. He was certain it was a mistake, that Ethan would stop, laugh, and come back to retrieve him. He let out a short, thin sound, something between a meow and a plea, but the car didn't stop. The red lights quickly diminished, turning into two tiny points that soon dissolved into the pitch black around the bend. The road became empty. Only the rustling of dry underbrush, muffled by the cold, broke the silence. The cat remained sitting on the shoulder, not understanding that his home had just driven away and would never return. The cold burned the pads of his dark paws. Ahead was only darkness. "You can't do this! You just can't!" A voice sobbed somewhere very close. The cat shuddered. The pads of his paws were stuck to the icy, uneven gravel. He lifted his head, not immediately realizing that the sound was unreal, just an echo from the world that had just departed. It was Clara's voice, breaking through the ringing sound of memory. I called. "They have a waiting list." He tried to see the red lights again. They were gone. The cat's eyes, accustomed to the apartment's muted light, now struggled to pierce the dense, felt-like darkness that had descended. The cold enveloped his body. This was not the apartment's cold, where one only had to go to the radiator or jump onto the couch. This was an alien, living cold that penetrated his short fur, pressed close to his body, and began to burn from within. The cat slowly got up, feeling the ache in his belly from the long hunger. He took a step in the direction the car had gone. Perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps his owner had gone to fill up the gas tank or buy something. He would sit here and wait. But the instinct for survival, which had lain dormant for a year, suddenly twitched. There was no scent of his home here. It didn't smell of cleaning supplies, kibble, the baby's scent, or Ethan's cologne. It smelled wild, sharp, of dampness and decaying leaves. The cat took a few more steps along the edge of the road, toward where the wall of black merging trees began. He walked slowly, his ears turned tensely, trying to catch a single familiar sound, but he only heard a distant, low hum that could have been the wind or a passing semi-truck far away. He was a house cat. His biggest problem in life had been missing a jump onto a shelf or knocking over a potted plant. He didn't know how to live outside. When the sky turned completely black, not a single car appeared on the road. The cat stopped. For the first time he felt a fear that was not the fleeting startle of the vacuum cleaner, but an all-consuming, cold heaviness. His tail drooped and tucked between his legs. He curled up on the roadside, pressing his head against his striped chest. He was waiting, but he didn't know for what, just waiting for the return of normal life. And then a sound came, a sharp, unnatural pop, similar to someone slamming a heavy door, but much duller and angrier. The sound came from far away, from the direction of the woods. The cat jumped, his eyes wide in the darkness. He didn't know what it was, but he felt it was dangerous. Immediately after, another utterly horrifying sound followed, a long, mournful howl that made the hairs on the cat's back stand on end. It was a howl full of hunger and savagery. The cat instinctively ran. He leaped from the gravel, jumped over a low, tough bush, and dove under the nearest pile of dry branches. He burrowed into the very center of this natural makeshift shelter. The smell here was better. Musty leaves, damp earth, a little decay, but this scent at least muffled the wild smells of the forest. He froze. His breathing was ragged and fast. Every movement around him seemed like a huge, predatory shadow. Even the slight rustle of dry leaves driven by the faint wind echoed in his head like approaching footsteps. Time dragged slowly, like viscous, cold resin. Closer to midnight, the temperature dropped even further. The cat contorted, trying to minimize his contact area with the frozen ground as much as possible. The cold seeped through the blanket he wore, his own short, thin coat. It wasn't the shallow shiver of fright, but a deep muscular vibration that rapidly depleted his last reserves of warmth. He tried to close his eyes, but couldn't. Every second he waited for the creature that had howled to approach his hiding place. His heart pounded so heavily and fast that he could hear its beat in his ears, drowning out the sounds of the night. Suddenly, right above his head, there was a distinct creaking sound. A large branch, which he was using as a roof, had shifted. The cat froze. He couldn't see what it was, but he felt something heavy standing over him. In the darkness, his eyes reflected a faint flickering light, probably a moonbeam that had broken through the clouds. A strange, loud snore, full of mucus and rasping, sounded right above him. The cat flattened himself against the ground, his back arched. He forcefully dug his claws into the soft earth. He was certain he would die here. His body instinctively prepared for a fight, but the cat knew he was weak and hungry. He waited. The snore repeated, but the sound was heavy and dull. The cat didn't move. He felt the smell with his whole body. Dog, wet, but seemingly asleep. 10 minutes of excruciating waiting passed. The dog was apparently a stray, just looking for shelter. The creak of the branch repeated, and the strange, warm smell moved away. The tension slowly released him, leaving behind only exhaustion and the nagging pain of the cold. He didn't close his eyes until dawn, checking every second to ensure the danger hadn't returned. When the sky in the east began to turn not black, but a dirty blue, the cat climbed out from under the branches. He hadn't found warmth here, but he had survived the first night. He was covered in dust, small leaves, and cobwebs. His striped tail, caked in dirt, now dragged along the ground. He could no longer just sit and wait. Waiting meant dying of hunger or cold. The cat emerged onto the road. He turned his head in the direction they had come from and began to walk. He didn't know which way his home was, but he knew that civilization and food were where the cars drove. Every step on the hard gravel brought pain to his stomach. He walked along the road with a desperate hope that around the next bend he would see familiar houses and not just the gray, endless strip vanishing into the distance. I must go. I must not stop. This simple, desperate thought became the only thing that kept him moving. Almost 2 days had passed since the gray-striped cat had last seen the bottom of his bowl. Hunger was not just an emptiness in his stomach. It was like a sharp, aching claw that was slowly and inevitably tightening inside. It made his paws feel heavy, and his short fur, helpless against the cold, now felt even under the bright, though toothless, daytime sun. Yesterday's fear of the howl and the shots had receded, giving way to a more primitive, pressing feeling, the search for food. The cat walked along the road. This road, which had seemed like a path to salvation yesterday, turned out to be only a gray ribbon flanked by identical, indifferent bushes and trees. He looked around. It felt like he had been walking for a very long time, but in reality, he hadn't moved far. Everything around him was unfamiliar, alien. This place didn't smell of people or houses or even the familiar scent of damp concrete. The cat slowed his pace. His whiskers twitched anxiously, trying to catch even a hint of something edible. All the scents he recognized were meaningless. Dry dust, gasoline from passing cars, the sour moisture from roadside grass. He turned off into a field, deciding that if houses existed, they must be there. He walked across the rough, mown field. Dry stalks rustled under the pads of his paws. And then, among the dirt and dead grass, he caught movement. A mouse. A small gray creature was moving quickly between clumps of earth. This was the first prey he had seen since he was abandoned. At home, hunting was just a game. A soft rug, a feathered toy, sometimes a lost mosquito. He played, but he never ate what he caught. Hunger overcame his domestic laziness. The cat crouched to the ground, arching his back and preparing to pounce. He crawled low, carefully ensuring that his striped body didn't cause the grass to rustle. His heart pounded fast, vibrating in his ribs. The tension was peaking. He jumped. The pounce was strong and accurate. He landed exactly where the mouse had been a second ago. However, his paws were too slow, his claws too unskilled. He only touched the tip of its tail. The mouse, squeaking with fear, darted into a small, inconspicuous burrow. The cat remained standing, catching his breath. He looked at the burrow, then at his paws. He was too stunned to immediately understand. The prey that could have saved him from the pain was gone. He nudged the earth with a claw, trying to dig down to the burrow, but realized the futility of his efforts. Despair broke through, leaving behind only an even sharper wave of hunger. When the sun began to sink in the west, the cat returned to the road. He continued walking in the direction where he hoped salvation lay. His desperate search led him to a small cluster of buildings, a roadside convenience store, a gas station, and a few sheds. Civilization at last, but it smelled not of warmth, but of garbage. He found it behind the convenience store near a shabby green wall. It was a large, overturned pile of trash, cardboard boxes, plastic bags, and most importantly, the smell. the smell of fried onions, rancid grease, souring milk, a scent that would have made him gag at home, but now this scent made his body tense with sudden savage hope. The cat cautiously approached the pile. He had never done anything like this in his life. His only bowl had been a smooth ceramic dish. He began to root through it. He pushed his muzzle between the damp bags, feeling the sticky filth and scraps of trash soil his gray fur. He stumbled upon the remains of a bone covered in grease. He seized it with his teeth and began to tear at it, ignoring how the bone scratched his gums. It was a dirty, humiliating meal. He didn't taste it. He only worked his jaws mechanically, trying to fill his shrinking stomach with anything. He felt a sticky, unpleasant burning sensation in his throat, but couldn't stop. At that moment, footsteps sounded nearby. Someone was coming from the store. The cat instinctively flattened his head to the ground.
"Hey, shoo!"
A sharp male voice called out. The cat flinched. He heard something solid hit the ground very close to him. The feeling of humiliation morphed into pure terror. He dropped the bone and, without looking back, leapt under a nearby dumpster. He lay under the dumpster until the footsteps faded. His owner had abandoned him. Now, strangers were chasing him away from the place where he was trying to find meager sustenance. His body burned with shame and tension, but the hunger hadn't gone away. It was only dulled for a short while. The cat cautiously emerged from his hiding place. The search for food here was over. He turned back toward the road. A little further on, low, squat silhouettes were visible. A small town. Perhaps there, among the houses, he would find some sympathy or at least leftover food. He moved toward the homes, driven by a faint spark of hope and a fierce ache in his stomach. A strong, sweetish smell of fried food broke through the mixture of gasoline and damp earth. It was incredibly encouraging. This smell meant one thing: warmth, a kitchen, and people. The gray, striped cat, having covered the last yards of the dirty roadside, reached the first line of houses. It was a small village or hamlet consisting of old but well-maintained wooden buildings surrounded by low fences. Through the gaps in one of the fences, that alluring, homey aroma was wafting. The cat approached closer. He saw a small, cleanly swept path through the fence boards. He raised his head, looking at the house. It looked nothing like his own, lower, with carved window frames. But it was a home. He felt a weak, almost dead hope begin to push him forward. The cat circled the fence until he found a gate. He quietly walked onto the porch and sat down by the front door. This was the safest place he had seen in the last 2 days. He lifted his muzzle and let out a quiet but insistent appeal. He meowed, not wildly, but exactly as he used to meow when demanding attention or food in his previous life. Short, civilized, with a hint of appeal. The door, covered with worn vinyl fabric, slowly opened. A woman stood on the threshold. She was short, heavy-set, wearing an old wool scarf tied over her head. Her face was stern. The cat instantly began to purr, arching his back and rubbing his side against the threshold. He raised his striped tail vertically, demonstrating complete readiness for submission and affection. This was it, salvation. The woman would see him, pity him, feed him, and let him into the warmth. "Shoo! Go on! Get out of here!" The woman's voice was unexpectedly sharp and piercing. The cat was taken aback. He didn't understand what he had done wrong. He hadn't begged loudly. He was clean, as clean as possible after a night sleeping under branches, anyway. The woman took a step forward, and the cat saw a stiff, woven broom in her hand. She swung it, not hard, but menacingly. "Get lost," I said. "We have enough of our own flea-bitten strays." She stamped her foot. The cat flinched back. The broom whistled past his ear. The humiliation he had felt at the trash pile returned with renewed force, but now it was more painful because here there had been hope. He spun around and fled. The woman, muttering something unintelligible, slammed the door shut, cutting off the smell of onions and the last of the warmth. The cat ran across the street. His bare paws sharply felt the cold of the wet asphalt. He headed toward another house, slightly older. There, he saw an old, slightly open cellar window. He decided not to ask, but to act himself. He sneaked into a low lilac bush under the window and waited to slip inside. And then a new wave of danger crashed over him. A furious, low bark erupted from the other side of the house. Not just a bark, but the hoarse, angry baying of a large dog. The cat froze in the bush. He saw a huge dark shadow that shot out from around the corner of the house. It was a terrier, not chained, but running free, and its growl, full of hatred, made the cat's fur stand on end. The dog saw the cat. There was not an ounce of pity in its yellow eyes, only predatory excitement. It lunged toward the bush. For the first time in his life, the cat faced a real threat of death. He bolted away from the bush. The dog, barking and wheezing, tore after him, and the dog was faster. Its teeth snapped just inches from the cat's striped side. In a desperate lunge, the cat leaped over a low, rickety fence. He didn't feel himself catch his hind leg on a protruding nail or splinter. He only felt a sharp, piercing pain that shot through his body from his paw to his head, forcing an uncontrolled cry from him. He didn't stop, didn't look at the wound. He ran, limping on that paw, feeling it begin to burn. He ran until he reached a half-ruined shed standing on the edge of the town. He crawled under its leaning wooden boards, burrowed into a corner, and only then allowed himself to collapse. He lay there, breathing heavily, listening to his heart beating like a trapped bird. The dog's furious barking faded somewhere in the distance, overshadowed by the smell of old rotten wood and manure. The cat could finally examine his wounded paw. Scarlet blood oozed between the pads, mixing with the dirt. It was throbbing painfully. The people he sought had not given him food, but had made it clear that he was an unwelcome guest here. They screamed, waved brooms, and sicked dogs on him. The cat tucked the injured paw beneath himself. Inside the shed it was dark but dry. Outside, the sun was already dipping toward the horizon, and the cold was beginning to bite sharply. He needed to stay here to heal the wound. But how long could he remain in this flimsy shelter? Where was the soft warmth? In his former world, even the coldest day never penetrated the thick, sealed windows. And the only reminder of winter was the condensation on the glass through which he watched the life of the birds. His gray striped fur was merely an adornment, not a means of survival. The penetrating cold had truly set in. He lay in the corner of the shed, and his body began to freeze. The pain in his wounded paw pulsed, but even this pain was dulled, giving way to numbness. The damp, pervasive cold seemed to suck the warmth from every vertebra. Ventilation gaps in the shed walls whistled, filling the shelter with a draft that smelled of rotten hay and dust. The cat tried to press himself closer to the wall to warm up a little, but the wall was icy. A short, bright memory flashed in his mind. Clara sitting on the couch, him lying in her lap, and the warm, thick throw feeling weightless under his body. That warmth was so far away that it felt like an invention. The cat spent the rest of the evening and part of the night in the shed without closing his eyes. The wound on his paw stopped actively bleeding, but movement was difficult. He couldn't find a posture in which the cold didn't cripple him. His striped tail served as a miserable excuse for a blanket, but offered no salvation. And before dawn, the real shock arrived. Something cold, wet, and silent began to fall from the sky. The cat lifted his muzzle toward a crack in the roof. The first snowflakes. He had never walked on snow. He had only seen it through glass. Now, snowflakes were falling through the holes in the roof and settling on the old boards. His fur, so short and ill-suited, instantly became wet. By morning, his flimsy shelter was obsolete. The wooden door of the shed creaked open, and an elderly man in a warm coat stepped inside. He glanced around the shed, and his gaze immediately fell upon the cat pressed against the wall. "Who are you now?" the man rasped. His voice was dry and rough. He picked up an old shovel that was leaning against the wall. The cat leaped up, forgetting the pain in his paw, and bolted for the exit. The man didn't pursue him, only grumbled, Go on, go on. I don't need strays freezing to death on my property." The cat scrambled outside, and the snow was no longer just individual flakes. It covered the ground in a thin, wet layer. The pads of his paws, unused to such a temperature, immediately began to burn. He walked with a limp, leaving dark, short tracks on the wet snow behind him. The cat realized he needed a more reliable shelter, and it had to be warm. He remembered how he had tried to squeeze into the cellar of one of the houses yesterday. He returned to that old, half-ruined house that stood on the outskirts of the settlement. Down below the window there was a small, dark opening, seemingly leading to steps. He felt his way with his paws and squeezed inside. Inside the cellar it was dark, but immediately warmer. There was no wind here. It smelled of earth, dampness, and something else. The cat froze. His ears were strained to the limit. In the depths of the darkness, a quiet, warning hiss was heard. The cat felt his back tense. He was ready to fight, but he was too weak to fight for territory right now. A figure slowly emerged from the shadow. It was a cat, old, dirty, with patchy fur and scratched ears. Her amber eyes didn't gleam. They were dull and wary. She didn't rush him, but she hissed continuously, sharply. The cat didn't make a sound. He simply stood, head lowered, showing his submission and weakness. He lifted his wounded paw slightly, as if demonstrating his inability to fight. The old cat took a step, then another, sniffing. Her whiskers twitched. Then she made a sound, not a hiss, not a meow, but a low, questioning rasp. It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't a command to leave either. It was an acknowledgment. She turned and went deeper into the cellar. The cat felt the tension that had gripped his body begin to ease. He understood he wouldn't be chased away. He was saved from the snow and the cold. The cat limped to a corner, far from the old cat. He curled up, trying to warm his snow-damp fur, but hunger and the pain in his paw wouldn't let up. The old cat, as if sensing his condition, returned. She carried something small and gray in her teeth. She placed it next to the cat's paws and retreated back into the shadow. It was a dead mouse. The cat looked at the mouse, then at the old cat, then back at the mouse. It was awful, but it was sustenance. The humiliation of rooting through garbage was replaced by acute necessity. He began to eat ravenously and hastily. Finally, for a brief moment, the cold and the pain receded, yielding to warmth in his stomach. But with that warmth, a wave of longing for the home he had lost surged over him. The cellar was large, dark, and smelled of history. Stone walls covered in moss held a dense, cool silence, in which every movement echoed. There was none of the cat's familiar scent of fresh renovation or citrus furniture spray here. It smelled of cold earth, mildew, and something sour and metallic, which the cat identified as the smell of loneliness. High ceilings, crossed by thick wooden beams, were lost in the darkness, and thin, pale rays of light broke through the sparse cracks in the foundation, illuminating the damp clay dust on the floor. In the far corner, where rotten boards lay in a pile, was the warmest spot chosen by the old cat. Here, in this damp, gloomy shelter, was the only island of relative safety. The gray-striped cat lay pressed against an old split brick that retained traces of warmth. He felt like a tiny dot, lost in a vast alien cavity. After he devoured the dead mouse given by the old cat, his stomach finally settled down a bit. The hunger remained, but now that his body was in relative safety and warmth, something worse than physical pain washed over him. Memories. He closed his eyes. In the darkness of the cellar, light flashed. His own kitchen, the neon light under the cabinets. Morning. Clara is standing at the stove in a soft housecoat. She pours herself coffee, and then, without looking, bends down and scratches him behind the ear. It was just daily, but from that simple caress, a wave of pure, unadulterated pleasure ran down his spine, and he turned on his loud, rumbling, purring motor. The baby. The child hadn't learned to walk yet. He crawls on the rug, and his hand, plump and clumsy, reaches for the striped tail. The cat doesn't run away. He lies patiently, allowing the small fingers to get tangled in his fur. The baby makes a joyful gurgling sound, and the cat feels needed, irreplaceable. He didn't remember the food or the toys, but the touch, the warmth, the smooth, measured rhythm of life, where every sneeze of his was a cause for concern, not banishment. The sharp contrast with the present pierced him. The cellar, the dampness, the rotten brick, the wary, strange cat nearby. The cat didn't understand what he had done wrong. He didn't scratch, didn't mark territory, always used the litter box. He was the perfect, loved cat. How could such love end with him being shaken out onto the icy ground? He opened his eyes and made a quiet, guttural sound. It wasn't a meow. It was pure, silent grief. The old cat, dozing in her corner, raised her head. Her dull eyes looked at him. "Morau," she rasped. Her voice was like the rustling of dry leaves. The cat remained silent. He just pressed his muzzle to his paws. He longed for someone to come, pick him up, wrap him in a blanket, and say, "You're home. You're safe." The longing for home was sharp, almost physical. It squeezed his ribs and didn't let him breathe fully. The cat tried to get up, just to walk around and shake off the wave of memories, but the wounded paw immediately reminded him of itself. He felt the pain in it intensify, and he fell back onto his side. He let out another quiet, painful sound. The old cat suddenly did something unexpected. She slowly got up and approached him. The cat froze, expecting aggression, but she only sat down next to him, sideways. She didn't touch him, but her warmth was palpable. She began to groom herself, first her side, then very carefully she brought her head close to his shoulder and ran her tongue over his gray fur. It wasn't Clara's soft caress. It was a rough, quick, but sincere act, intended to support a fellow creature. The cat felt the touch for a brief moment. It carried not love, but sympathy. It was a silent recognition that they were both abandoned and both had to survive. He closed his eyes, feeling the rough tongue on his coat. This touch was the only connection to the world of warmth he had had for these days. The old cat retreated after a minute, returning to her corner. But even this brief show of attention made the cat feel less alone. He no longer cried his cat's tears. His body no longer shook with silent grief, but he missed them. He missed the baby's scent, the sound of the coffee maker, the softness of the sofa. He looked at his wounded paw. It needed treatment. He knew he had to continue the struggle, or he would freeze or die of infection. A new, even colder day awaited him, and he needed to find out where the old cat got her food. A shiver. 3 months ago, Ethan came home from work, and his jacket smelled of strong, frosty wind and snow. He stood in the entryway, shaking the snow from his shoulders, and that shiver, which the cat felt lying at his feet, was almost pleasant. It meant that outside was cold, and inside was security and warmth that would never end. Today, the shiver that shook the cat's gray-striped body was completely different. It was an internal, nervous tremor, caused not by the cold, although it had intensified, but by pure animal fear. The old cat had disappeared. She had left at dawn to find food and hadn't returned. The cellar, which had seemed like a saving refuge yesterday, now felt like a trap. The frost outside the window, which the cat sensed from the icy air seeping through the cracks, was hardening. This was evident because the smell of dampness had intensified. The frost made the moisture sharper. The cat stood up. The wounded paw still hurt, but he had already learned to bear weight on it, using it cautiously, relying more on the outer side of the pads. He approached the small opening that led to the street. He needed water, or at least snow, to quench his thirst. He lifted his muzzle and sniffed. The street didn't smell of hunting or mice. It only smelled of scorching, merciless frost, mixed with the sharp scent of old, frozen earth. Suddenly, he heard it, a low scratching sound coming from somewhere outside. It wasn't a bark, it was a scrape. Someone was trying to get into the cellar. The scratching quickly intensified, accompanied by heavy, snorting breathing. Dogs again, large, homeless dogs looking for warmth, the same ones the cat had encountered yesterday. The cat dashed toward his corner where the old boards lay. He heard something heavy hit the wall above his head. A guttural, wet growl sounded. They had found the opening. It was too small for a large dog, but they were trying. A minute later, the cat saw a dirty, dark muzzle push through the opening. Its eyes were frantic, full of hunger and wild malice. The dog began to chew viciously at the edges of the wooden frame, widening it. The cat knew he couldn't fight. He couldn't run. The only way was up, to the street. He bolted toward a narrow, barely visible crack in the back wall, which he had noticed yesterday led to the surface. It was a risky attempt because the crack was narrow, and he would have to squeeze his entire body through. He heard a crack. The wood gave way under the pressure of the dog's jaws. A loud, joyful bark of triumph rang out as the dog finally pushed its head and front paws into the opening. The cat was already halfway through the crack. The stone masonry scraped his back, and the damp, hard earth around him squeezed his ribs. He felt his fur catch on a sharp edge of stone. Behind him in the darkness he heard a snap. The dog had apparently managed to squeeze through a bit and was now trying to grab his striped tail. The cat let out a short, panicked yelp. He lunged forward with such force that the pain in his wounded paw became unbearable. But he didn't stop. He shot through the crack and found himself outside. A blizzard greeted him on the street. Thick, stinging snow flew horizontally, and the temperature must have dropped below freezing. The gray stripes on his fur were instantly coated in white frost. He landed on the pads of his paws and immediately felt the frost burn them. He limped away from the house without looking back. He ran until his strength failed him. He found himself by a large, low building. Warm, moist air escaped from beneath the wall through a narrow slit. It was bliss. The cat crawled toward the slit, and the warm steam, smelling of machine oil and dust, enveloped him. His short fur slowly began to thaw, but the spot was occupied. Other stray cats were sitting in the gap, 2 skinny, dirty females and 1 large black tom with a torn ear. They were not welcoming. When the striped cat tried to press closer to the warmth, the black Tom lifted his head and let out a low, warning growl. The cat retreated. He didn't want to fight for the warmth. His strength was only enough for escape. He moved a couple of yards away from the saving steam and lay down on the frozen ground by the wall, where the warmth was no longer felt. He felt his body slowly turn to stone from the encroaching frost. He was alone again, but now he was also exhausted. Suddenly a wave of heat pierced him. But it was a bad, false heat. It was a fever. A burning sensation beneath his gray-striped fur replaced the piercing cold that had gripped his body. The cat raised his head from the frozen ground. He realized he wasn't sleeping. He was in a feverish delirium. He sneezed once, then a second time, a strong, rib-shaking sneeze, after which a moist stream shot from his mouth. The internal fire was fighting the external frost. He tried to stand up. The pain in his wounded paw was now mixed with general weakness. He felt that his body, worn out by hunger and cold, was finally giving up. The spot by the wall where he had lain down yesterday turned out to be a trap. He was too close to the wind and too far from the warmth of the pipe. His eyes were watering. The liquid he instinctively tried to lick away was bitter and irritating. The cat limped to a small dry island under an overhang where the snow wasn't as thick. Since escaping the cellar, he hadn't eaten or drunk. The thirst was agonizing, but he couldn't just eat snow. It only intensified the internal cold. His condition deteriorated rapidly. His breathing was wheezing and uneven. His nose was congested. He tried to rub his muzzle with his paw, but that only caused the moisture on his fur to quickly freeze. He was sick, a vague, severe illness against which his domestic constitution was completely helpless. In this state, hunting was impossible. His movements were slow, weak. If yesterday he could still try to fight for a spot at the garbage pile, today he could barely walk 5 yards. He just lay there, allowing the wind to dust his striped side with dry snow. By noon, the blizzard subsided, and people began to appear on the street. The cat lay by the road, barely reacting to the noise of footsteps and voices. He was too weak for fear. He just watched. A woman in her 40s walked by. She was bundled up in a long blue puffer coat. She carried a grocery bag from which the green stalks of leeks protruded. The smell of fresh vegetables coming from the bag was faint but sharp. She saw the cat and stopped. The cat didn't move. He just looked at her with squinted, cloudy eyes. "My God, how pathetic," the woman said softly. She didn't approach, but she didn't walk on either. She just stood, looking at his thin, exhausted body and his dirty, tucked-in, wounded paw. "You're very sick, aren't you?" she whispered. The cat shuddered. For a brief moment, hope flared in him, a human voice that didn't yell but sympathized. But then she made a gesture, adjusted the bag on her shoulder, sighed, and moved on. The dialogue ended with the quiet shuffling of her boots in the snow. The cat closed his eyes. The woman was gone. His internal battle with the illness resumed. He felt his muscles begin to cramp from the spasm caused by the fever. And then another person approached, a man, large, in a dark work jacket, with heavy, unhurried steps. The cat didn't even lift his head. The man stopped directly over him. He stood for a long time, and the cat felt his shadow above him. He didn't sense malice, only indifference. "Hey, you!" a sharp, rough voice called out. "What are you lounging around for, you deadbeat?" Instead of just walking past like everyone else, the man lifted his foot in a heavy boot. The cat didn't have time to dodge. A not strong, but sharp kick from the boot landed on his striped side. The impact wasn't strong enough to break ribs, but it was sudden, crude, and full of disgust. The cat let out a painful, panicked cry and rolled a few inches, hitting the icy curb. The man spat into the snow and walked on, without even glancing back. It wasn't an act of sadism, but casual irritation directed at a dirty nuisance in his way. But for the cat, it was the second direct physical assault by a human in these days, a betrayal. The cat remained lying there. His body shook no longer from cold, but from shock. The blow had knocked the remaining hope out of him. He crawled under a low snowdrift, where his gray color blended with the dirty snow. He lay, breathing heavily, and watched the people walking past. No one saw him. No one noticed his struggle, his pain, his illness. He was ready to give up. His eyes were empty. There was neither fear nor hope left in them, only apathy. He realized he would die here, freeze, or simply fall asleep. He no longer wanted to fight for a life that brought only pain. He closed his eyelids. Silence descended. Not an external silence, but an internal one. The buzzing of pain, the constant fear, the nagging hunger. All of it suddenly receded. All that remained was the heavy, slow beat of his heart, which seemed to be running on its last reserves of fuel. The cat lay, sprinkled with a thin layer of dirty snow, and felt himself become part of the frozen earth. Apathy consumed him. He no longer felt the fever's burn, nor the sharp cold. Even the pain in his wounded paw became muffled, as if distant. This was a state close to surrender, to a complete refusal to fight. If I just fall asleep, it will all end. This thought came not as fear, but as relief. The cat didn't move. He lay under the snowdrift next to the very abandoned house from whose cellar the dogs had chased him. He had returned here instinctively, to a place where he had once felt at least a shadow of safety. The snow continued to fall. Not in a blizzard now, but in large, slow flakes that settled on his gray, striped fur. He tried to recall warmth, but it was difficult. Memories of the sofa, of Clara's hands, of the rumbling purr. All of it now seemed like fantasy, a mirage that melts at the first touch. His breathing was shallow, not deep. He conserved every drop of energy. In a semi-sleep, he saw a familiar scene before him. The bright, sunny kitchen, the small baby sitting in his high chair, Clara feeding him from a spoon, and the cat sitting below. His tail resting relaxed on the floor. Quiet, safe. Why? The question he couldn't ask returned. Why did they throw him out? He had been a good cat. He loved them. He couldn't understand how love could end so easily. Tears, not water from inflamed eyes, but true physical grief, squeezed his chest. But somewhere deep down, beneath the layer of apathy, something stirred. It was a primitive animal impulse, an instinct, not the memory of home, not the longing for love, but a pure, blind stubbornness to live. No, he wouldn't die here, not from hunger and not from indifference. He had survived the dogs. He had survived the cold. Slowly, with incredible effort, he began to stretch his paws. Getting up was the hardest thing he had done in all these days. His muscles trembled with tension like over-tightened threads. He felt his vision darken, and his head rang from the rush of blood. The cat stood up. He stood on 3 legs. The 4th, wounded one, barely touched the ground. He felt an agonizing jolt of pain whenever he shifted even the slightest weight onto it. He was shaky, thin. His striped coat hung loosely over his ribs. He looked ahead. Where? It didn't matter. just away from this place where he had been betrayed twice. He took the first step, then the second. They were slow, like the movement of a broken machine. He heard a sound, not a bark, not a scrape, not a car horn. It was a quiet, metallic clang, as if a car door had closed somewhere far ahead on the main road. This sound became a signal for him. Where there are cars, there are people, and where there are people, there might potentially be food or shelter. The cat forced himself to walk. His short fur offered no warmth, but the instinct that had suddenly awakened in him was stronger than the cold. Every step was a victory over the desire to simply lie down and die. He emerged from around the corner of the house and found himself on the street. The evening twilight was already painting the sky in dull orange tones. Ahead of him was the main road leading out of the settlement. It was on this road that he saw a person, a woman. She was walking unhurriedly from the direction of the store, carrying 2 large, heavy bags. She was alone, and there was no one else nearby. The cat stopped. He felt neither joy nor hope. He was too exhausted for emotions. He just sat in the middle of the road, pathetic, sick, and stared at the approaching figure. This was his last silent plea. Do what you want. I can't fight any more. The gray light of the late evening softly enveloped the street. The snow had stopped falling, and a ringing, frosty silence settled on the road, broken only occasionally by the faint crunch of boots. The gray, striped cat sat on the dirty snow. His body was leaned against the icy curb. He wasn't shivering. He was too weak for that. In his amber-greenish eyes, there was no longer any pleading or expectation, only the empty acceptance of the inevitable. Illness and hunger had taken away his strength for emotions. He watched as the woman slowly, with dignity, approached down the road. She was short, in a dark, long jacket. Her hands were occupied with large, bulky bags, causing her to list slightly to one side. A faint but pleasant smell of fresh bread cut through the frosty air. The woman stopped a few yards from the cat. She didn't notice him right away. She set the bags down on the snow to rest, and only then did her gaze fall upon the motionless, dirty clump by the curb. The cat didn't move. He just looked at her. The woman, whose name was Audrey, looked him over. She saw his drooping skin, his dirty and matted fur, and his wounded, tucked-in paw. She saw his dry, hot nose and eyes squinted with pain. This was not a typical stray cat who had simply come to beg. This was an exhausted, dying animal. She took a deep breath. Inside her, the fatigue after a day's work and a suddenly emerging acute sense of pity fought for dominance. She could have simply walked past, as dozens of people had done before her. That would have been logical. "God, what did they do to you?" Audrey whispered, and her voice was low and sympathetic. She didn't expect an answer. The cat only twitched his ear slightly. Audrey crouched down, ignoring how the frozen snow immediately began to dampen her pants. Her movements were slow and careful. "Well, hello there, poor thing. Where did you come from in this weather?" she said. And in her voice there was neither fear nor disgust, only quiet sadness. She slowly extended her hand in a knitted dark glove. She didn't intend to pet him. She just wanted to show that she wouldn't hurt him. The cat watched the glove. He had no strength to resist, but no desire to trust either. People's hands had brought only pain lately, closing the carrier, abandoning him in the cold, kicking him. But this hand was still and calm. Audrey sat like that for a full minute. The cat didn't turn away, he just watched. Finally, she slowly brought her hand to his head and gently touched his fur at the base of his ear. It was the first tender, non-threatening touch in a week. The cat shuddered. His body, numb with apathy, suddenly felt something. Not joy, but shock from the contrast between the merciless world and this soft warmth. He felt the warmth of the glove penetrate his thin, frozen fur. It was a short circuit between the memory of home and the cruel reality. He didn't purr. He couldn't. Instead, he felt the muscles in his back tense to the limit. He expected a blow to follow, that the glove would turn into something hard, like a boot. But no blow came. Audrey only stroked his back once, and then lifted his chin slightly. "You're burning up," she whispered. And now alarm mixed with determination appeared in her voice. "You're sick, really sick." She withdrew her hand and looked at her bags, then at the freezing cat. The struggle inside her was over. She couldn't leave him here. "All right, old boy, let's go," she said sharply, as if making a final decision from which she would not back down. Audrey quickly stood up. She opened one of her bags, pulled out a warm, thick scarf, and quickly wrapped the cat in it. The cat was too weak to resist or even understand what was happening. For the first time in a long time, he felt a real, dense fabric enveloping his fur. She lifted him into her arms. He was incredibly light, as if his bones were hollow. "Just try to bite me," she quietly warned. She picked up her bags, pressed the cat to her chest, and walked on. The cat buried his face in the scarf. He heard the steady beat of her heart. And this rhythm was the first calming sound he had heard since he was abandoned. He was in a human's arms, and he was being carried into warmth. He closed his eyes, neither believing nor hoping, but submitting to this new, unexpected movement. "Well, we're here. Hold on," Audrey muttered, barely audible, more to herself than to the cat. Her voice was slightly strained from the brisk walking and tension. The cat, pressed against her, felt her clumsily unlock the door, felt her turn the heavy bolt. Then a sharp rush of warm domestic air hit his muzzle. This air didn't smell of medicine or alcohol. It smelled of old wood, dust, and, most importantly, food. Audrey carried him into the entryway. "Don't be scared. I'm going to wash you first," she said, setting him down on the floor, still wrapped in the scarf. The cat didn't have time to be scared. He was too weak. But his body, which had just been enveloped in warmth, now instinctively flinched, anticipating new pain. He knew water was another enemy. Audrey didn't hesitate. She carried him into a small bathroom. The cat saw the bright light, the white tile, and the faucets from which water flowed. She quickly but gently unwrapped the scarf, and he felt the frosty air collide with the hot steam. The bathing was agonizing. Audrey poured warm water into a basin, adding something with a mild, soapy scent. The cat tried to break free. His paws scraped against the smooth sides of the basin. He hissed, but it was a weak, exhausted hiss. "Easy, easy, you can't carry on like this. You're sick," Audrey said, holding him, but her hands were soft. She gently washed the dirt, snow, and dried blood from his gray-striped fur and wounded paw. When it was all over, she wrapped him in a thick terry towel and began to rub him dry. The rubbing was rough, but dry and warm. "There, now you look like a cat." After that, Audrey left for the kitchen. The cat, left wrapped in the towel, tried to look around. The room was small, but clean and very warm. An old, faded but soft rug lay on the floor. A minute later, Audrey returned, carrying something incredible. It wasn't a ceramic bowl, but a simple, deep plate. In it lay something that smelled of meat and milk. He ate ravenously. At first, he attacked the food with a wild animal fury, trying to shove as much as possible into himself. But his stomach, shrunk from weeks of starvation, couldn't take so much at once. The cat felt nausea begin. He stopped, breathing heavily. Audrey sat nearby on a small stool. "Slowly, don't rush." She brought him a small, low box, lined with an old, clean blanket, and placed it right next to the radiator. It was an improvised bed. The cat, with a final effort, crawled inside. As soon as he was in the warmth and softness, exhaustion crashed down on him like an avalanche. He felt his muscles, still twisted with tension and illness, begin to relax. For the first time in a long time, he could fully stretch his paws and not feel the cold. He drifted into sleep. But it was a restless sleep. His brain, overloaded with fear, began to play nightmares. The cold, the dog's furious bark that rang right in his ears, the heavy boot hitting his side, the alien, wet, foul-smelling breath in the cellar. The cat began to twitch. His short fur was damp with sweat. He whined. A quiet, thin, panicked sound that he hadn't made even during the scariest moments on the street. He woke up sharply. He didn't know where he was or who was nearby. He jumped up, preparing for another escape. Audrey's face was leaning over him. "Shh, sleep. You're safe," she said. She reached out and began to stroke his head slowly, surely, from his forehead to his neck. The cat couldn't believe her. He tensed. His pupils dilated in the semi-darkness, but the hand didn't move away. Her touch was warm and steady. He listened to her slow, deep breathing. He slowly sank back into the bed. Under this touch, the panic began to subside. The distrust remained. It was strong, like a rusty nail, but his body was too exhausted to resist it. He felt the smell of her skin, and it wasn't threatening. Audrey stayed sitting nearby until his breathing became even. He fell asleep again, but this time the sleep was deeper, heavier. He slept, pressed against the old blanket in the warmth. He didn't yet believe this was a new home, but he could finally rest. And outside the dark window, snow fell quietly. The quiet, even hum of the radiator was the only sound in the room. He woke up to the realization that his body no longer ached. The sharp burning in his ribs and the muscle soreness caused by the fever had receded. The fever had broken. The cat felt it immediately. His nose was wet and cool. Through his half-closed eyes, he saw not a bright, cutting light, but a soft morning glow penetrating through the curtains. He was lying in his improvised bed by the radiator. He took a deep breath, and a clean, unfettered breath entered his chest. Warmth and sleep had done their work. Several weeks had passed since the day Audrey picked him up from the road. The first few days were the hardest. The cat ate frequently, but sparingly. His paw gradually healed. Audrey treated the wound with some stinging but effective liquid, and now the pad was covered with a thin scab. He no longer limped, only stepped cautiously on it. He slowly got used to the new person. Audrey wasn't like Clara. She didn't baby him. She didn't carry him in her arms constantly. She was calm, quiet, and very reliable. She didn't demand love from him, only peace. Every time Audrey entered the room, the cat instinctively tensed, ready to flee, but she simply set down his food bowl, changed his water, and left. She showed her care not with emotion, but with action. One day, maybe 10 days later, he didn't manage to jump away when she walked past. Audrey bent down and very slowly, to give him time to run, extended her hand. The cat froze. He stared at her wrist and fingers, not moving. "You're going to get well, but you have to trust me," she said softly. She touched his back with a gentle but firm motion, and for the first time in a long time, the cat didn't flinch. He felt his striped tail lift slightly. He made a short, low sound. Audrey quietly sat down next to him, not trying to pick him up. He listened to her steady breathing. He began to study her. He followed her with his eyes from his corner, watching her go about her business, reading, knitting, watching TV. He understood that this woman was his security. One afternoon, as Audrey sat in an old armchair reading a book, the cat made a decision. He crawled out of his bed and approached her. He walked slowly, placing his paws cautiously, as if navigating a minefield. He walked up to her chair, stopped, lifted his head, and looked at her face. Audrey didn't react right away. She slowly lowered the book. The cat nudged his muzzle against her leg, covered in wool pants. It was a timid, uncertain movement, but it meant more than any cry. Audrey placed her palm on the back of his neck. She began to massage his shoulders, kneading the muscles hardened by fear. The cat felt a wave of warmth rise from her hand and spread throughout his body. And then it happened. At first, it was a quiet, hesitant sound, like an old, poorly oiled mechanism. But then it intensified, turning into a pure, vibrating, rumbling purr. He was purring. For the first time since the day he was shaken out of the carrier, the purr was the sound of surrender to kindness and warmth. He closed his eyes, pressing against her. Images flashed in his memory, the cold cellar, the barking, the hunger. But those images were distant now, quiet, like the pages of an old book that he had closed. A few more weeks passed. The cat, now clean, strong, and sleek, sat on the windowsill. Outside was a real harsh winter. A cracking frost stood on the street. The snow lay in a thick white blanket, and the wind howled through the wires. The cat looked out the window. He remembered how scared he had been out there, but his gaze didn't linger on the cold. He turned and looked at Audrey. She was sitting at the table, covered with a warm tablecloth, drinking tea. He jumped to the floor. He was home, not the home where he was betrayed over a sneeze, but here, his new, quiet, safe home. He wasn't a pet. He was a companion, and that was better. He walked up to Audrey, held his tail vertically, and leaned his side against her leg. He purred again, confirming his decision.